My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. On the screen, you'll see some PowerPoints. Right now, that's my email address. You're welcome to make contact, and or my website address. It has a lot of downloadable resources. Everything's free. That's what I do. I work to try to help carry this message, the message of the 12 steps, the message specifically of step 12, having had a spiritual awakening. I was in AA for 4 years. Really in the bondage of self. Alcohol had been removed. My sobriety date is February 21st, 1984. And that's a story for a different day, but the hospital in which my wife was hospitalized asked me to quit drinking on February 20th. I haven't had a drink or a inclination to have a drink since that day. And so February 21st is my first sober day, 1984. I didn't go to AA for another 3 months. I got a sponsor once I acknowledged I was an alcoholic, but I thought I was an alcoholic based on the drama in my life. I later discovered that drama wasn't what made me an alcoholic. What made me an alcoholic was my addiction. When I started, I could not stop. And when I stopped, I could not stay stopped. And I thought for those first 4 years that drama was the problem. And at 4 years, I worked these steps out of the big book with a step guide, a term you don't hear very often. I'm not sure if I created it or if I picked it up from somebody, but it wasn't a person who became my sponsor. It was a person who was a project manager who took me through the steps. It took a year. Looking back on it now, I understand that those first 3 steps are about a relationship with power. My synonym for spirituality, a lot of people have resistance to the word spirituality. I don't, but some people do. And I try to figure out ways to help people have a better or a different or a healthy understanding of the various words in the big book and in our culture, so that they can relate to the big book and our culture, so that they can get what the promises are and my experience with those 12 steps. A spiritual awakening. A spiritual awakening, by Appendix 2's summary in my terms, is a change in the way we feel and think and behave, and it's done to us, not by us, but not without us. A lot of components there. The essence of it is a change, a radical change. I had tried organized religion. In fact, I studied to be a Catholic priest for 7 years in a monastery, 7 years of silence. I didn't find what I was looking for, so I left. I tried psychology for 6 years with a graduate education. I didn't find what I was looking for, so I left. Self-help, same story. Quite frankly, AA, same story for the first 4 years. I did not find what I was looking for. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I wasn't finding it. I was a seeker and proud of it. I didn't realize I wasn't a finder. I thought seeking was the deal. When I heard a man share about the big book as a textbook, and that he had help going through the textbook, like a teacher would take a pupil, one step at a time, one page at a time, one paragraph at a time, applying it to himself personally and technically and mechanically. And he described and evidenced in his own behavior and his words and his tone that he had had a massive change in his life. And I had not. I wasn't drinking, but that wasn't because of AA or the big book or the steps. Drinking had been removed before I ever came to AA. I mentioned that. But I was still restless, irritable, and discontent, not knowing that I was restless, irritable, and discontent, because I had always been restless, irritable, and discontent. It was a state of being. I had never not been, so I didn't know that you didn't have to live that way. This man took me through the first 3 steps, and I began to have an understanding and an experience with step 1. I didn't have any experience or new experience with steps 2 and 3 because I had a prejudice based on my training in theology and my exposure to organized religion about steps 2 and 3. Later on, and that's a story again for a different day, you may have heard it if you attended my step 2 and 3 sharings, that my concept of God was the very impediment to my relationship with the mystery. Now, I knew none of that. So it's not important that you have an accurate understanding of or experience with steps 2 and 3 in order to do the steps and have a spiritual awakening. That's good news. That's really good news. You don't have to have an understanding of or an experience with steps 2 and 3, a power other than yourself, in order for that power to work in your life. Well, that's at least my experience. The next 4 steps in this rocket launch to freedom, it's a metaphor that Bill uses on page 25, rocketed into the 4th dimension, the world of the spirit. That first stage of the rocket launch, we get into the rocket. Once we get in the rocket takes us to where it's going to take us. It's a wonderful image. But as we know from our exposure to rocketry and space and moon landings and explorations, those astronauts in the rocket are working. They're pushing levers, they're calculating, they're doing stuff to guide the rocket. That's that second stage. I'm in the rocket, but I have some work to do. Step 4 is an inventory. Bill gives us this terminology, this image, this model, this metaphor on page 47 when he says that step 2, willingness, is the foundation to an arch through which we're going to walk to freedom. Well, he didn't tell us about the foundation. I assume it's step 1, complete defeat, surrender. The word surrender is not in the big book, but it's a wonderful word if you're applying it to step 1. It's a terrible word if you're applying it to step 3. Step 2 is about willingness, as I mentioned, and that's where Bill mentions the cornerstone on this arch through which we walk to a new freedom, a choice about a concept, and then we move on to step 2, which is, Bill says, the keystone, that stone in the apex at the top of the arch that holds the entire arch together, that decision to turn. There's no action in step 2. It's a choice. God is or God isn't. There's no action in step 3 other than praying the prayer, but it is a commitment to action. It's a decision to turn from my self-centeredness, which I saw in Unmanageability for the very first time at 10 years of sobriety. My awakening was very slow and very progressive over a 10 to 15 year period, going through these steps with a step guide 3 different times, having 3 different experiences, broadening and deepening my relationship with the mystery or with the light or with power or with a higher power, or with God as I don't understand it. But my very first experience was going into the step 4 to see that resentments was one of the building blocks of this spiritual arch. And I didn't know that I had resentments until this man helped me unpack it. as I mentioned in step 4, resentire, sentire, to feel again and again and again, anger, and then to take a look at my fear and take a look at my inappropriate sexual behavior, to take a look at all of my manipulation and dishonesty and misrepresentation and all the secrets that I'd held for 48 years. 1988, I did this work when I was 4 years sober. And then I did the step 5, and I began to find freedom. I began to be conscious that I had found freedom. Bill says on page 75, he continues and finalizes his building of and walking through the spiritual arch there at the conclusion of step 5. What is step 5? I put down full disclosure. The Oxford group, the predecessor group to Alcoholics Anonymous, called it confession. But that's a loaded term for those of you who might have some resistance to or unfortunate experience with organized religion. I had no problem with step 5. In the monastery, we had full disclosure. I met with my spiritual guide once a month. I met regularly on weekly or daily basis with people to do the sacrament of confession. When I got out of the monastery in 1964, I began to explore psychology and therapy. So I had no problem with talking vulnerably about myself. Although after I did the 4th step and the 5th step from the big book, I realized how superficial both confession and therapy had always been. I'd had good therapists, very skilled, knowledgeable people. But I was never really open, vulnerable, transparent, which is what step 5 suggests to us. Admitted to God, pretty straightforward. I've never heard God talk back to me. Admitted to ourselves. I'm so manipulative, I don't even know I'm manipulating myself. I'm so dishonest, I don't know that I'm dishonest with myself. Some people call it denial. Mine was really unconscious, an unconscious mask that I had created that allowed me to live in society feeling somewhat safe because I was projecting to you who I wanted you to see me as. But unfortunately, it hid me from me, and I didn't know that I didn't know, and I couldn't see that I didn't see. I was quite capable of not being truthful with myself, not aware that I wasn't being truthful with myself. That's what I mean by denial. It's really not a conscious thing. It's an unconscious thing. And whereas I was as powerless over that, seeing the truth, as I discovered I was in my addiction, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. That's the point of step 5. Admitted the exact nature of our wrongs. You hear unfortunate comments in some meetings or from some people who have been around for a while about hiring a taxi in Mexico and reading your 5th step to somebody who doesn't understand English. And it's kind of like silliness. The whole point of the 5th step is to be a humbling experience. Read the material, pages 72 to 75. It is to be a humbling experience, to tell someone all our life story. Autobiography is a quite valid approach, I believe, to the 5th step. It was my first experience in my first year. It wasn't good enough for me to see the truth or to change, but it was good enough for me to think that I had done something so that I could stick around and feel a member of the program. It was a total delusion. I read a script of my life, the drama in it, some of the highlights and the secrets, but I saw no truth, no exact nature of my motives and my values and my beliefs and my delusions. I didn't crack it at all. I did a 9-step based on that superficial 4th step, which said I was sorry, I was sorry, I was sorry, a very sorry 9-step. As a result of completing all 12 steps in that first year of recovery, I did not change. Nothing happened. I stayed around, not knowing that I didn't know, thinking that I did know, going to book studies and step studies, oblivious. Well-intentioned, but just a sober horse thief. You've heard the story. I stole better horses and I got caught less. I was still a horse thief, figuratively speaking. So this man stressed to me, no secrets. No secrets. That was his major thrust. Because he had been sober 16 years, had relapsed and was out for 5 years, came back, and he was 8 years sober when he was doing the work with me, leading me through the steps. And he says he kept a secret. In his first year, he relapsed. In his 16th year, he doesn't know the truth of it, but he thinks they're connected. And so does the big book. It says we shine the light into the darkness. We overturn the rocks, my words, not the big book's words, but we reveal all the sources in us of tension. That's the whole point of it. The Oxford group, the predecessor group to Alcoholics Anonymous, calls it soul surgery. Now that I know about the bedevilments on page 52 as the behavioral description of unmanageability, the spiritual malady, I call it exorcism. Exorcism. I don't mean in a religious sense. The bedevilments, befuddled, controlled as if by devils in me. I'm a puppet on strings, and the strings are attached to events and circumstances, and I don't know that I don't know, and I can't see that I don't see, but I'm reacting to circumstances and events, and they control me. And this process cuts those strings. This process excises those beliefs and those motives and those that corrupt perception and delusions of reality. Full disclosure. The way I start a 5th step, just to break the ice, because I'm a little nervous every time I hear a 5th step, and the people who are coming to give their 5th step are a little nervous. Normally, I've taken them through the 4th step, so we at least know one another and what's going to be somewhat presented. Is that we read the first 3 pages there, 72 to 75, not all of 75, but we read it. I start with the first paragraph, they read the next paragraph, I read the next paragraph, and there's something comforting about reading something that we know together out loud, making sure they've read it and understand what we're doing here in the 5th step, but they're hearing their own voice. They're hearing my voice. They're hearing the antiphonal flow of the words going back and forth in a very safe way. And it seems to break the ice. It's just my technique. That's not a suggestion in the big book. But I also know that at least this is my interpretation of the 5th step. It's not a discussion. When I'm hearing a 5th step, they do 90% of the talking, I do 10%. And that's not a formula, that's a benchmark for me. I'm there to listen. I'm there to witness to their story. I'm there so that they can hear their story for the very first time. They've spent weeks, months, sometimes they have spent years developing their fourth step in increments over a long period of time. This is the first time they sit down to read it out loud consecutively, column 3, column 4, column 3, column 4, column 3, column 4 of the resentment inventory. And after an hour or two of reading out loud consecutively, all of this false belief in the third column and the corrupt motives and the self-centeredness in the fourth column and all the character defects and all of the impact, negative, horrible impact on themselves and other people, they're hearing it for the first time. The puzzle piece begins to form and they begin to see the picture and they begin to have an experience with the negativity in their life and its impact on themselves and other people. It's a common experience for me. 2 hours, 3 hours, someplace in there. It's not a discussion. It's a sharing of somebody's life. It's not a friendship. It's a life and death errand. The bill is very clear in the big book. This is a very sacred journey. The fifth step. It's not therapy. It's not sponsorship. It's not a time to work the steps. It's not a time to correct no, I just listen. I have a 8x11 pad with me. I tell them I'm going to make notes so that I don't interrupt them if I have a question or I see a pattern or there's some other observation I might want to make at some point. I might interrupt them in the sense that we have a little bit of a dialogue. I'm not there as a bump on the log. I'm an interactive person, at least listening. There may be something that's relevant that I'm a sounding board for, and I give them a little feedback, but very little. Again, this is my interpretation and my experience. The big book indicates that this is a humbling experience. That's the whole point. The whole point of it is the removal of these obstacles. The whole point is to have us experience the suffering of our lives so that we're willing to change. We're removing the clouds in us that are blocking the light in us. It's a wonderful metaphor. We're removing or having removed the clouds in us that are blocking the light in us by talking about it. The big book suggests that we're the ones who choose who we give it to. The culture and the tradition, and I think it's healthy for us to give it to our sponsor and or step guide, who's ever taken us through the steps. If the step guide is separate from the sponsor, as was my case, I asked my sponsor if he wanted to hear my fifth step, and he usually wanted to hear a Reader's Digest version of it. So I would spend a few hours with my step guide to finish it. Then I would make an appointment with my sponsor to give him a Reader's Digest review of it. Sometimes I would sit with my best friend who's also in the program and bring him up to date with it. One time I sat with a woman to have a different experience, setting aside my old experience. And quite frankly, it was a very excellent experience. She was able to point out to me that after 3 hours of a fifth step, and I was 10 years sober, she said, "Oh, you're pretty sloppy in your 10th step, Herb, if in fact you've waited 3 years to get all this out." My sponsor, my step guide, and my best friend had not made those comments to me. but she cared enough about me to tell me the truth and hurt my feelings. But she woke me up to my careless approach to the 10 step on a daily basis or as needed basis. See, this whole process is to shine the light on the truth of my humanity so that I can remove and have removed, hear it, grace and willingness. This isn't a human development process, although it certainly has all the earmarks of human development in terms of therapy and religious confession and all the rest of the things that are benefit to human beings. But this is the walking hand in hand, as the promises at the end of the 5th step on page 75 suggests. My willingness to be transparent and God's grace to give me that willingness and, in fact, to remove the obstacles to my relationship with myself. Removing the tension in me, removing the source of discomfort in me, withholding nothing. Anything that's embarrassing to me, even though I might have shared it in therapy and or some other 5th step. If in fact I still have discomfort about a secret, even though it's not really a secret because I've told maybe 1 or 2 people previously, if I still have discomfort, I do believe that this is the place then to reveal that secret so that I reduce the level of discomfort. I become a little bit more comfortable with my corruption, with my lack of humility, with my lack of awareness or kindness to other people. The 4th step talks about looking at and analyzing the exact nature of our wrongs. This 5th step is to remove the impediments, withholding nothing, a humbling experience, the exact nature, the underlying causes and conditions. So it really puts the burden on the individual to have done some pretty deep work in the 4th step, looking at my beliefs in the column 3 resentment inventory and seeing the delusions, looking at the corrupt motives in the 4th column, that self-centeredness that impacts every aspect of my behavior, looking at the source of my fears, not trusting God, not trusting myself, not trusting the universe, not trusting other people. Looking at my unhealthy sexual behavior, especially that first time going through the steps, I didn't know that I had principles. The answer to question number 9, what should I have done instead? Disclosed to me my principles, that I was transgressing. It also disclosed to me, because I really did want to be a decent human being, it disclosed to me that principles that I didn't have that I wanted to adopt in order to be a decent human being. What should I have done instead? And then looking at all the various aspects of my dishonesty. 4 years sober, I'm cheating on my expense account because I'd always cheated on my expense account, 25 years of employment at that point. I had never challenged it, nor had my sponsor ever challenged it, because that he was doing the same thing, quite frankly. He just co-signed my deviance. He didn't know that he didn't know. I didn't know that I didn't know until I knew. Oh, I wonder what part of rigorous honesty that, yes, exactly. All work in preparation for the 8th step, which is what the 8th step says, doesn't it? We make a list of harms in the 8th step. We make a list of harms. We did so when we took inventory. My inventory worksheets include taking a look at harms because of that. Not all the time, however, is there in the fourth step all the harms done. That dishonesty didn't come out as much until I got to the eighth step. I can have resentments and not have harm. I can have harm and not have resentments. It's really important not to destroy the fourth step and fifth step notes until you've finished the ninth step. Where else would you find the source of your character defects or step 6? Where else will you find the list of harms done for step 8? I was told to keep my fourth and fifth step notes until I finish my ninth step. Once I finish my ninth step, then in some ritualistic way or no ritual at all, get rid of the material so that it's not an albatross around your neck and or it can't be discovered by other people. If you live with somebody and they know you're doing a fourth step, preparing for a fifth step, even if they're not in a program, they will know what that is and they will find it. Sometimes consciously looking for it, sometimes just coming across it. It's up to you to protect yourself. It's very unfortunate what then happens. I had the experience. I was not careful. My wife wasn't looking for it, but she did discover it. It was devastating to her and aggravated the process and prolonged the process of the ninth step amends and the forgiveness process. But when I talk about that, you'll see the healing that takes place. Part of the healing of me comes in the steps 4 and 5. 6 and 7, when I talk about those in next month, I'm going to separate them out, even though they're very short. I'm going to talk about the 6th step, and then the following session, I'll talk about the 7th step. 2 of the most powerful transformative steps I've ever experienced. It's really important to have an environment that's private so that people can have trust that they can be vulnerable and that they can share and talk and they can be loud or cry, whatever is necessary in terms of an emotional reaction that's spontaneous, that comes unexpected in my case, so that it's not interrupted. I prefer people to sit in one sitting. I allocate sometimes 3 hours, so anywhere up to 8 hours. I used to do more, but I found that wasn't necessary for them and it was too hard on me. So I help them shape their 4th step to be able to do a 5th step in one sitting with no more than 8 hours. I'm willing to do that. We bring lunch. We have a bathroom facilities. The most important thing is that we have privacy, the ability to go at our own pace, taking breaks when necessary, bio breaks or smoking breaks or food breaks or whatever is necessary. The key is to reveal all the secrets. I end up talking, as I mentioned, or reading actually a continuation. Once they've finished their resentment inventory, we talk a little bit about that. Their fear inventory, we talk a little bit about that. Their sex inventory, we talk a little bit about that. Whatever is necessary to make it a human experience. And then they reveal I ask them to reveal their secrets and any dishonesty. I have a set of instructions that are not in the big book, but they come out of my experience, including the 7 capital sins from the 12 and 12. Not a model that I use, but I acknowledge it because it's in the 12 and 12. Then I pick up the book on page 75. We ended our discussion at the beginning of our sit We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. That's what I meant about shining the light in the darkness. We stop there and they read their fourth step. When they're finished with that, I ask, are you finished reading your fourth step? And they say yes. Then I pick it up on page 75. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, I pause and I look them straight in the eye. Did you read to me everything that you wrote down? I mean, we've been together for 3 to 8 hours. I haven't been watching them, and they may have skipped a paragraph or a page, thinking that they didn't want to reveal that. So I asked them, did you read to me everything that you wrote down? And I pause. 30 seconds is 30 years. Oh my God, it's a long pause. But I wait. About 5% of the time, a minority of time, they'll cough something up. Because we've been together so long, they're tired and they're exhausted, and they just, something will come to them and they'll reveal it. But I ask a second question. Did you write down everything that came to your consciousness as you were doing your inventory? And I pause. That 30 seconds again. And I look them in the eye. And about 5% of the time, something, well, I didn't think it was anybody. Oh, I wasn't good. No, whatever the exclamation is that reveals their discomfort, and they reveal it because they prayed the set-aside prayer at the beginning of the process, and we read the process about being honest or you'll drink again. That's a promise in the 5th step. If you're not transparent, you will drink again. Relapse? Of course. That was my step guide's experience. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. These are the promises now, the 5th step promises, like there were 3rd step promises on page 63. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. You see, it's approximate. It doesn't tell us that it's going to actually happen here. It's saying it may happen, like it did on page 63. It may happen. On page 83, 84, those promises say it does happen. It's a firm promise. Placed in a position of neutrality, we enter the world of the spirit. The promises of finishing the 9th step. The feeling that the drink problem, the addiction problem, if you're not an alcoholic, has disappeared will often come strongly. And then one of my most favorite lines in the big book, I guess I might have several. We feel we are on the broad highway, capital B, capital H. We are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. That collaboration, that partnership. My willingness to take action in God's grace, both to give me the willingness and to give me the power to do it, to do the action. But then the final instructions, returning home. So I suggest that they go to a place where they can be quiet for an hour. And I'm very clear. That's a 60-minute hour, not a 50-minute therapy hour. It's a 60-minute hour. That's the connotation in the big book, my interpretation, for meditation. Not for writing, not for praying, not for reading the big book, not for reading your 4th and 5th step notes. No, it's a meditation. Carefully reviewing what we have done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know God better. Bill suggests that they start this hour with prayer. We thank God is a prayer. Anytime you're talking to God, my sponsor, my step guide suggested that that's a prayer. You're talking to God. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know God better. How curious. I've spent weeks or months or maybe years preparing a fourth step, and now hours preparing a fifth step, all about me. And it says we know God better. Oh, maybe that's because we're removing the impediments to my relationship with this power that is deep inside of me. It says we look at page 59. It says the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals. Carefully reading is a synonym for meditating. Carefully reading each of the first 5 steps, reviewing what we have done. Oh, let's see, in the first step, body problem, allergy, mind problem, obsession, spiritual problem, unmanageability, and all of the ingredients and the experiences that went into that. If in fact you had those understanding and that experience. What did I do in step 2? Oh yeah, I made a choice in page 53. God is or God isn't. Do I mean it? Do my feet move as if I mean it? Etc. through each of the steps of meditation. We ask if we have omitted anything, a prayer again. Have I been complete? And for you perfectionists out there, I know there's 30 or 40% of you are, ease back a little bit. You know, try to exercise some common sense and cut yourself a little bit of slack. I know that's dangerous. The word at the end of the 9th step is painstaking. A lot of people who haven't looked the word up think that that involves pain. Because of the word itself, it doesn't. It just means, have you been careful with the detail? Have you been careful with the detail? What I know is this is progressive recovery. In 1988, I did this work the first time. I had a powerful experience. The very first time I saw that I had had a victim mentality, and from then on, I did not. I knew I was 100% responsible. I don't have a part in my character defects. I have the whole thing, 100% responsibility for my life. For we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free person at last. And then he talks about some construction stuff, stones and cement. And he's just, are we careful with the details? Have we followed instruction to the best of our ability? I have progressively seen that I don't know that I don't know. Then I know that I don't know. Then I know that I know. And that cycle continues, a cycle of discovery. The more conscious I become, the more light that there is. The more light that there is good news. I see more. The more light that there is, I see more. That's the bad news, in one sense. Those questions are important from the standpoint that, have I been thorough? To the best of my ability, because when we get to step 6 on page 76, he's going to say, how did you do with answering those questions? When somebody finishes their 5th step, I tell them, don't do necessarily the 6th and 7th step unless you're prepared to do it. They'll be exhausted. Go home, have dinner, take a walk, get some sleep, have a meeting with a friend or a significant other. Go to a movie, but certainly get some rest. And the next day, call me and I'll give you the step 6 instructions if they haven't already had them. Again, don't destroy your 4th and 5th step notes until after you finish your 9th step, so that you have something that guides you for the balance of the work through the ninth step. Thank you.